Hello and welcome to The Pulse. Both the Hong Kong and Beijing governments are determined to get legislators to pass the amendment to Hong Kong's fugitive offender laws. They've set a deadline of July to get it done. At the moment, pro-government and pan-democrat legislators are deadlocked and are unable to start scrutinising the bill. Initially, Democrat James To presided over the first two meetings of the bill's committee. However, he was unseated by the pro-government camp through a written vote arranged by Legco's secretariat. Last Saturday, tussles broke out when the two camps held separate meetings to fight for control of the committee. On Tuesday, another scuffle occurred when both sides tried to start their own meetings. Former Legco President Andrew Wong, an expert on Legco's rules and procedures, has challenged the legality of the secretariat's involvement and the pro-government lawmakers' action.
Although Mr. To, who's a senior-most member, failed to complete the election of the chairman in two meetings, but in the third meeting, he did succeed. He had himself elected, all right? So the Bills Committee was there. The very fact that he was successfully elected because the other faction refused to attend the meeting. But the quorum for the meeting of the Bills Committee is only 3. So by absenting oneself, by boycotting the meeting, in fact, they have not taken part in the election at all. But that doesn't invalidate the result of that election meeting. The guideline that Abraham Razak should preside at the election meeting of the Bills Committee is not a valid instruction, it's not a valid decision to be followed. Whenever a person requests a discussion at a meeting, or whenever one objects, the matter will have to be brought up to the committee itself for decision. And the decision was not made because it was never brought up to the Bills Committee for discussion. So what the Secretary General did was invalid.
On Friday, we went to Legco to discuss these matters with legislators Paul Tse and Alvin Yeung. Paul Chan, can I just ask you first, I mean, we can get on to what's going on in Legco, but on the substantive matter of this amendment to the fugitive law, do you in fact think there is scope for further changes to it as presented?
Well, I suppose you have to ask the government that question, but as far as I'm concerned, obviously any further concession on the part of the government that would be welcome, especially by our commercial sector in terms of the exemptions from previous offences before we pass this amendment, perhaps also the threshold from 3 years to further like 7 years. I think that would be welcomed by them.
And can anything be done to address one of the fundamental questions, which is whether the law would be used to take people involved in political or social activity across the border?
Well, that's a lot of guarantee in the whole regime already, so we shouldn't worry too much about it.
You think that's adequate, do you?
I think that's adequate. That will be adequate. It's a modern world, it's an internet world. Anything that vaguely involves any political gesture, any cultural, religious kind of remnant of persecution would be looked at on a microscope. So we're just talking about not a general arrangement. We're talking about ad hoc situation, one by one. Any one particular case that goes down badly would be magnified, and the whole world will look at it, and it will not work again. So I have confidence that that won't happen in that sense.
The whole world is looking at it now, and the government's saying, so what?
Yeah, but it's just doing what everybody else should be doing. I mean, that the whole world is moving towards a trend of further cooperation among states to extradite criminals, to prevent crimes or uphold criminal justice system. So, I mean, we have a lot of transnational criminal activities, money laundering, drugs, and what have you. And I think it's just a trend. And I think the UN has been advocating this for years. the states should work together better to extradite criminals across the states' borders.
Okay, well, let me ask you, Alvin Yeung. I mean, it's the same question, really. Are there conditions under which this amendment would be acceptable to your... Can you see anything going in there that would be acceptable to you?
I can hardly imagine the government would have any compromise to input any human rights guarantee in the law. Right now, this particular amendment proposed by the government is far from sufficient to guarantee human rights and fair trial. And by opening up the floodgates to send fugitives to China, that is where the crux of the matter is. And right now, I do not see the government would say, all right, we're going to exclude China like what we have been doing in the past 20-odd years.
So your position is rendition to China under whatever conditions is not acceptable?
Is not acceptable. The Democrats are very clear on this. Over the past 20-odd years, it has been the arrangement. That is the cornerstone of one country, two systems. That is how people have trust on this system in Hong Kong. And I do not see why should we rush to this conclusion and try to open up this floodgate without proper consultation.
And what's your answer to the people who say Hong Kong can become a haven for fugitives from justice from the mainland?
First of all, do we have any figures to prove that over the past 20 years where we do not have such arrangement, people rush to Hong Kong and take Hong Kong, treat Hong Kong as a haven? No, we do not have any evidence on that, number one. Number two, if that logic is solid, is convincing, then why is the government compromising by removing 9 economic crimes from the list? So are we suggesting that we are okay to treat Hong Kong as an economic crime haven? No, that's not logical, right?
And Paul Tse, can I ask you, I mean, the government keeps saying, we hear it literally every day, this is urgent, we've got to get this legislation through. And they say, and it's all because of the case of the alleged Hong Kong citizen, Hong Kong resident accused of a murder in Taiwan. But the reality is, that is not going to happen.
Right, right.
So how can it be urgent?
I have to say the government can do much better in terms of relying on just this one pillar of the Taiwanese murder case. As a matter of geopolitics, can you imagine the U.S. not having any rendition or extradition agreement with Mexico, with Cuba, with all these other states? Do they really believe in the judicial system of these other states? Frankly, no. But still, you have to have some kind of arrangement, at least on an ad hoc basis, it need to be, to deal with heinous crimes, really violent murders and things. But now we can't even have that as a neighboring region when all hundreds of thousands of people move across the border every day. When the fact speaks for itself that there have been over 100 cases of criminals removed from China back to Hong Kong for various matters, various crimes. But at the moment, that door is completely shut for not even a general arrangement, but even an ad hoc arrangement between Hong Kong and China. So that's unrealistic. That's against common sense.
Well, I don't really understand what Paul is trying to say when he is trying to use the U.S.-Mexico analogy and put it into the Hong Kong-China case. Of course, the U.S. can always say no to Mexico's request. But can Hong Kong's chief executive really stand up to Beijing's request? That is where the problem is. We do not have full trust in this government. We are not confident that the chief executive would say no to any request from Beijing.
Well, let me ask you that. I mean, surely that's the crux of the matter, isn't it?
It is. It is the ultimate prejudice or problem that we have in Hong Kong over the last 20 years or so. It's always just question of trust. After some 20-odd years, about time we look at this issue seriously. Do we still want to shut the door completely against this arrangement, even on a one-off ad hoc basis? And I think there are lots of people who are in favor of at least giving a try, because if we even don't open this slight gate, this scope, there won't be any chance for us to practice in reality what might happen.
But Paul, once this door is opened, can we shut it up if we encounter any issues?
I don't see why not. in theory and in practice.
Well, it's very optimistic of you, and I admire that. But I find it
And she always tried to be.
extremely amazing that you could be so optimistic.
It's not so optimistic, it's pragmatic.
Well, you say pragmatic, but I do not agree, because once this door is opened up, you can never shut it. And may I just reply to your suggestion that this bill or this change of law is not targeting at China only, but to the rest of the world?
Yes.
Yes and no. Because practically speaking, I am quite sure and certain that the chief executive, whoever that will be, he or she could easily say no and stand up to any other countries, say North Korea. If Kim Jong-un sent a request, I'm sure the chief executive say no. But when it comes to Beijing, can the chief executive really say no? That is the problem.
Well, I'm just going to stop you for a moment because we've got to take a break. We'll be back soon. So we're still sitting in Legco, continuing our discussion on the fallout from the amendment to the extradition bill. And can I ask you, Alvin Yeung, the proposal that you've put forward about how the courts here could tackle crimes committed overseas, how would that work?
Simply speaking, I'm amending the current Offense Against Persons Ordinance and expanding the court's jurisdiction to try any murder or manslaughter cases committed by Hong Kong residents overseas. That would tackle the Taiwanese murderer case easily. Right now, we understand that the Taiwan authorities, they are not willing to cooperate, even if we pass our Fugitive Offenders Ordinance. So my proposal is an alternative. That is, if we wish to bring justice to the victims, then of course we have to try the alleged defendant.
And you know what the response to that has been. There'll be all sorts of problems gathering evidence. You wouldn't get fair trials.
But we understand that extraterritorial jurisdictions is not something new in Hong Kong. In the crimes ordinance, there's a child abuse clause that can try Hong Kong residents committing child abuse or sexual abuse overseas. And we have done that 3 times over the past 10 years, 2 of which happened in China. And so gathering evidence is just an administrative issue that can easily deal with. So it's not a matter of how, it's just a matter of whether we are determined to do it.
Do you think that might be a way out?
Well, in theory, yes. But I have to say that the exception that Alvin just mentioned is very much based on treaty obligations. It's an international treaty on protection of children's rights that we are trying to fulfill. So that applies to every country, basically. But in terms of murder, obviously, we want to make sure that whatever trial that takes place in Hong Kong with the best of evidence and witnesses that we can have. We don't have to mess around with just one go at it, and that's it. There'll be no other trial possible. So we have to be very careful to extend that jurisdiction, which is, after all, a very exceptional thing for Hong Kong's jurisprudence. We're always based on local jurisdiction. So murder, perhaps, is also one of those areas which we have to be dealing very carefully, because it's a common law offense. At the moment, we have extended the definition of murder towards expanding it to cover acts that took place in Hong Kong, but the death occurred elsewhere, and vice versa. But now we're talking about extending it altogether to acts that was committed outside of Hong Kong, and the death took place outside of Hong Kong. This is an extension, and it might involve question of retrospectivity, which is against common law principle, of course.
Perhaps I should remind Paul that the common law principle that we do not try offenses outside the jurisdiction, of course, is the norm, but there are always exceptions. And the UK also has this extraterritorial jurisdictions to try murder and manslaughter outside the UK. So my proposal is simply similar to the one took place in UK.
You said it yourself at the beginning of this discussion. The government's not going to accept that.
Well, I am trying to demonstrate that there are lots of other alternatives to this Fugitive Offenders Amendment.
The pro-government majority in Legco is absolute. Anything that they wish to pursue will be pursued. So I don't really see what the point of all this delaying is when the inevitable is going to happen.
Well, I would say we're still trying everything we can. And by delaying this procedure, in fact, by now it's already been a month. We're still trying very hard to try to convince the government and our colleagues from the other side of the political aisles that there are actually a lot of alternatives that can cause less harm to Hong Kong. By keep pushing this very amendment, everybody will lose.
Well, I think Stephen's got a very good point. Why not concentrate more on enhancing the protection under the proposal instead of wasting time and proposing something that the government would say, no, definitely, and simply we don't even have enough time to consider. So,
but I think the reality is the government will reject whatever the opposition camp puts out.
I'm not quite sure about that,
Or
Stephen.
even
In terms of the proposals by the Liberal Party, I mean, they are quite sensible proposals in terms of
But they are
raising
from within the
threshold.
pro-government camp.
Yeah, but obviously, I mean, there's still scope for negotiation, but by sort of delaying it, using all kinds of tactics and antics, if you like, it won't work towards a more sensible, more cordial sort of relationship in terms of passing this bill.
But may I just point out one very fact? Have we seen the government really willing to take up any compromise or any, counter proposals put forward by the Democrats in the past 20-odd years on any controversial bill?
Let me remind you, the proposal for vacant property tax is put forward by one of your colleagues and yourself, I mean the Civic Party. So they are favorably considering the proposal, and in fact, much to the dismay of the pro-establishment camp.
I would say that is far from the degree of controversies.
Well,
It's far
there you
from
are,
the
man.
fugitive
You just asked
offenders.
the question whether, if any. I'm just saying that there's one very good example which is ongoing.
But there is a fundamental problem, isn't there? I mean, the scenes we've seen in Legco in the past week or so are unprecedented. Relations between the two sides seem to have broken down entirely. Is that going to be what we're going to see?
I hope not. Certainly hope not.
Is there a way around that?
We should not be proud of it.
Is there a way around that?
Well, we've been trying to cool down as much as we could. We've been trying to avoid confrontations as much as we could by refixing our meetings, by postponing our schedules and what have you. But look, we've been sort of followed every step of it. So we cannot avoid any confrontation at the moment, except that dropping our sort of meeting altogether. So it's not working. It's certainly not conducive to any kind of talk. But seriously, I think we are at a stage when we have to consider taking unprecedented move towards working out this Bills Committee or the substitute for it.
What would that include?
Well, at the moment, there are a couple of options on the table. One is the one proposed by me in terms of sort of forming a special task force committee to deal with the bill and much sort of lesser scale, hopefully to contain the confrontations as much as possible. There's also this far more controversial proposal, which is to move the bill straight up to the council stage to resume the second debate and the third debate, if you like. That is certainly also certainly very controversial. If not,
and would remove the legislator's job of scrutinising legislation, wouldn't it?
Depends on how you look at it. We can still perform our job there and then.
I would say Carrie Lam has to step in. She just cannot, hide inside the chief executive office and say it's purely Legco business, because we all know, although Legco is where the battlefield is, but it's not only here at Legco. It's not only a confrontations between our two camps. It's the chief executive's job to settle this matter. And the bill itself remains controversial, even if his suggestion is being taken up and adopted and having a special task force being formed. Confrontations will remain, and we will still fight over there.
So, I mean, is that where we are now, that confrontation is inevitable and unsolvable?
Wherever you're talking about.
Well, I'm afraid. I mean, although I very much enjoy having a cup of coffee with Paul right here, but I fear that if we do not, look straight into the matter, that is the bill itself, no matter how many other task force you form, or you go straight to council, there will still be confrontation.
No, but I'm thinking more fundamentally now. I mean, there's other business that Legco is going to have to discuss in its current session. I mean, I'm just wondering if there's been an irretrievable breakdown in relations between the two sides?
Well, I would say, shortly before the shooting of this program, we passed the budget here at Legco, although most of the Democrats vetoed it, but still the financial secretary enjoyed a good yes vote. Legco is still functioning, although not perfectly.
But the audience will be have been hearing the bells in the background. Something what's been happening this morning is very unusual as well. I mean, the quorum bell is being requested every 5 minutes, 10 minutes. So I certainly agree with you, Stephen, that in fact it's going to be a while before the tension between the two camps can settle down a little bit so we can keep our cool to keep doing business as usual.
Well, let's see if that will happen. Thank you both.
Thank you
very much indeed.
Thank you.
And that's it from us for this week, but we'll leave you with some images of those unprecedented confrontations in Legco. And in our usual calm and non-confrontational way, look forward to seeing you again next week.
接受咗阿波謝偉俊，我哋有冇人支持？支持！